Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Seminary Ridge Museum's Tuesday Facebook Live. We're coming to you each and every Tuesday during this time of quarantine, bringing you interesting stories and interpretations in the areas of race, religion, medicine, and war from the 19th century and beyond. My name is Pete Miele. I work at Seminary Ridge Museum now as the executive director. And as we wait for people to log on, talk a little bit about what we have going on over the next couple of weeks. Next Tuesday, Dr. Darrell Black will be back talking about Confederate industry during the Civil War. The week after that, I am going to continue with my look at civilians during the Gettysburg campaign with a conversation about Margaret Crichton's book, Colors of Courage. Many times people will ask me, what is the best book on Civil War civilians? And without a doubt, I say Margaret Crichton's Colors of Courage. So we'll be taking a deep look at that book and look at areas of overlap between the book and Seminary Ridge Museum. As we get to the end of the month and we really get into the anniversary of the Gettysburg campaign, we're going to be filming some videos from different sites that generally get overlooked when talking about the Gettysburg campaign, about the two armies converging on Gettysburg. We're going to be going out and filming some pre-recorded videos at sites like Caledonia Iron Works and Wrightsville, and we're going to be posting those leading up to July 1st, the 157th anniversary of the start of the Battle of Gettysburg. And on July 1st, we're going to be doing some live streaming from the campus, looking at the fighting that's going on around the seminary during that first day of July of 1863. So that's some of the exciting stuff that we have coming up. As always, I invite you to like this post, share it with your friends, and if you really like it, we invite you to join and support Seminary Ridge Museum and help continue to tell these important stories, both digitally and as we move back into regular operations, which hopefully will be sometime in the coming weeks. I see Linda's back from Kenhurst, Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining us again. Thanks for joining us, Chuck. Leave a comment. Let us know that you're watching. Let us know if you have any questions as we go through the presentation today. I'll try to answer questions as they come up or answer them at the end. So I'm going to talk a little bit, talk today about the seminary in the battle. And we tend a lot of times to think about the battle occurring on the seminary grounds and what's going on with the military actions that are happening there. I like to say that the seminary grounds are the area that is the longest inhabited by one or the other army during the Battle of Gettysburg. It's almost continuously occupied from the evening of June 30th, when Buford's men come up, all the way until the Confederate Army retreats on the morning of July 5th. But we tend to sometimes overlook the fact that during the battle, this was an operating seminary, and there were about 30 to 40 people who were living and working and learning on these grounds, whose lives were forever impacted by their experience. And even the title of this presentation, The Seminary in the Battle, shows this juxtaposition between this peaceful place of a seminary and the horrors and the maelstrom of battle. So we're going to be looking at that sort of dichotomy that appears between those two things, between this peaceful place, because that's one of the reasons that the seminary is established where it is west of Gettysburg, is because it's out of town. It's going to be on this peaceful ridge where people can shut out all of the trappings of society and focus solely on their religious studies. And here it's one of the first places that's hit during this battle and becomes the scene of horror and war over the period of the first 3 days of July 1863 and even beyond. So I am going to try to share my screen here because I have a PowerPoint here, and of course it worked when I tried it before this presentation. We'll see if we can get it to work during this presentation. That would be a good thing. So originally this program was conceived as a walking tour of Seminary Ridge, and I invite you to come when we do reopen back up, to come to campus and to join us on one of these walking tours and go to the places that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be, of course, showing images of them as we go through today, but it's not the same as actually being on the grounds and actually seeing what's going on this campus. So stories of the residents of Seminary Ridge in 1863. And I want to start by just talking a little bit about the history of the seminary. Whoops. I used this picture a few weeks ago in one of my presentations, and everybody liked it so much that I brought it back up here again. This is the first known visual depiction of the seminary. It was drawn in 1833. And it was presented to Samuel Simon Schmucker, who's the first president and faculty chairman of the seminary. And it's believed that this image was created before without ever having seen the seminary, because it was drawn in 1833, and you'll see there are both houses, one on either side of the main seminary building, and the one on the right in this picture, the home of Charles Krauth, was not built until 1834, so probably was done in Europe as by a visual description of what the seminary would look like. But the seminary is established in Gettysburg in 1826, and it's going to be the second Lutheran seminary in the United States, but it's the longest operating. The first seminary was in Hartwick, New York, up near Cooperstown. In the 1820s. It's largely inaccessible. Many people who want to become Lutheran ministers are still studying with private tutors or going off to Europe where they can be trained. And as we get into the late 18 teens and early 1820s, there is this increased need for a seminary, a place for training ministers for the United States. A few towns in the area submit bids to get this seminary, and Gettysburg wins out. It is, as it was in 1826, in 1863, and even today in 2020, the center of 10 roads. So largely accessible from all corners of the eastern seaboard. And Gettysburg, the borough, wants to get this seminary and decides to give the seminary use of a building in town, the Gettysburg Academy building, which still stands today on the corners of High Street and Washington Street, and also give $7,000 towards the creation of this new main building. And the new main building, ground is broken in 1832, completed and ready for students in fall of 1832. So ground is broken in 1831. Building is completed in 1832, and for 30 years, it is going to be the center of life and learning and living at the seminary. The main building holds everything, including classrooms and dormitory space. Students are taking meals in this building, and going to library and going to chapel. So the building consisted of everything. By 1834, these two homes on either side of the building are erected. In this photo, in this image, the building on the left is going to be the home of Samuel Simon Schmucker. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then on the other side, it's going to be another faculty home that's eventually inhabited by a man named Charles Krauth, who is the second professor there at the seminary from 1850 to 1865. And we'll talk about him too. This is another image of the seminary grounds created in about 1840. Shows again the two houses there. We're looking. This is if we were standing on Middle Street, about where the traffic light is today, maybe a little bit further down, looking back towards the seminary Schmucker house in the foreground, main seminary building, and then if you just look closely there, Krauth House in the background. So let's talk a little bit about Samuel Simon Schmucker, who is his name is synonymous with the seminary in the first 30 years of its existence, 40 years of its existence, and even beyond. Schmucker, by the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, has become a pretty vocal opponent of the institution of slavery. But he didn't always have these views. He starts as a colonizationist in the 1820s. He advocates the freeing enslaved persons, but sending them to Africa, believing that freed slaves and white people cannot exist together, and that they should be sent to Africa. This is a widely held view in the 1820s, 1830s. Abraham Lincoln starts out as a colonizationist, and then there's even a colony in on the continent of Africa, Liberia, that is founded as a colonizationist colony. But Samuel Simon Schmucker's views begin to change in the 1830s and 40s, 50s, and 60s. He has a pastorate, is a pastor of a church in New Market, Virginia in the 1820s. So he lives among and pastors to slave owners, and he ends up courting and marrying the daughter of a wealthy slave-owning family in the Shenandoah Valley. And as part of the wedding present, Schmucker and his new bride are gifted to enslaved persons. And this is right before he moves up to Pennsylvania. And by this time, Pennsylvania has passed a law of gradual emancipation. And if Schmucker brings these enslaved persons into Pennsylvania, they will be freed in 6 months. And he looks into and performs a legal process to change their status to indentured servants. And by this, they stay in his employ for 7 years, and then are freed after that. So Schmucker and his wife Mary, their new family, comes up to Seminary Ridge, and with them are these two indentured servants who stay in his family for in service of his family for 7 years. And there is some evidence to suggest that it's possible that when those 7 years are up, Samuel Simon Schmucker returns to Virginia and brings and indentures 2 more people. Even into the 1840s, there are servants living in the Schmucker household. But as we get into the 1860s, Schmucker has become more and more vocal against the institution of slavery, and his views are widely known amongst the Confederate Army. He had been training seminarians here at the Lutheran Seminary from both North and South, so he's a pretty well-known theologian at the time, and his views on slavery are not unknown. And as the Confederate Army begins to make its way up the Shenandoah Valley into the Cumberland Valley and into Pennsylvania, Schmucker receives word from a former student, a man named George Deal, that the Confederates intend to arrest him because of his views on slavery. And sometime before June 26, 1863, when the first Confederate forces come through Gettysburg, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, Schmucker flees. He heads east towards York, Pennsylvania. We're not exactly sure where he ends up in the summer of 1863, but he is definitely not on Seminary Ridge. This is the back door of his home in this image right here. It has been altered significantly since its time as Schmucker's household. But if you see about where that red circle is there, that's the original part of the home. That, and then the windows above it, the little bump out there is new, but that's subtract the bump out, and that was an original part of the home as well. Everything to the left of the bump out is new, and actually these are the offices of Seminary Ridge Museum. And actually my office is where that bump out is, on the 2nd floor. But on the morning of July 1st, as the 147th New York, one of the initial Union units to make it to the field at Gettysburg. They're going to come right past the back door of this building, and veterans talk later about how there was a woman and a young girl that were standing at the pump in back of this building, pumping pails of water for the soldiers who were passing. Now, these men had been marching for quite some time at this point, and some of the men stop and break ranks and go over and try to get some of this water. Well, their officers come by and kick those pails of water over because they needed to make it out towards McPherson Ridge, north and south of the Chambersburg Pike, to stem the tide of Confederates that were coming. They were slowing down in this time of emergency. But we believe that those two people that were standing there, the woman and the young child, were Schmucker's wife and daughter, who he had possibly left behind as he flees towards York. More evidence to suggest that they were there, that Schmucker's wife and daughter were still there. On July 2nd, a man named Eugene Blackford, who commands 5th Alabama Battalion of Sharpshooters, is somewhere in the rear of the Schmucker house getting some water, and he looks up to the second floor of that house, and he sees women beckoning to him to come in, and he goes into the house, and there was a soldier in there, and the building had been turned into a care center, a soldier that was threatening these two women with a gun. And Blackford goes in and is able to defuse the situation and begins to talk to these two women, and they say we are Mrs. Schmucker and the daughter of Samuel. Well, they get to talking, and it turns out that Eugene Blackford of 5th Alabama Battalion of Sharpshooters was distantly related to Schmucker's second wife. His uncle, Blackford's uncle, happened to be married to Mary Catherine Steenburgen, Schmucker's second wife, her sister. So it's distant, but they do make the connection, and it's kind of interesting that these two families on different sides of the political spectrum end up here at the same home on Seminary Ridge. Well, getting back to Schmucker himself, he flees, but of course he leaves all of his personal effects there in his home. And the Confederates, they can't, of course, arrest him, but they do end up taking out their aggression on some of his personal effects. And one of the things that gets tossed out of one of the windows, and you can see there, I've circled, it's quite possibly that window. That room would have been, we believe, was Schmucker's office. One of the things that gets tossed out is a Bible. And it's thrown out into the dirt lane behind the house. And a Confederate soldier, comes by and sees the Bible in the mud, picks it up and puts it back in the home on the case, and writes a little note on the inside. And if you remember, you may have gotten our newsletter this couple of months back, and I wrote a little article about this Bible. But in the back of the Bible, on the last page, is a note in pencil written by this Confederate soldier that picked this Bible, Schmucker's Bible, up and put it back in the home. It says, "This is the Holy Bible I pick up out of the mud and placed on the case again." Well, 7 years later, Schmucker is reaching the twilight of his life, and he's probably getting ready to donate his books to a library. And so he decides he wants to annotate that note. And just underneath it, he writes in very elegant Samuel Simon Schmucker handwriting, "This pencil mark was written by an illiterate, but I trust pious rebel during the sacking of my home and library during the great Battle of Gettysburg, SS Schmucker. September 28th, 1870. In less than 3 years, Schmucker would be dead, and he rests today in Evergreen Cemetery in Gettysburg. Well, moving down the ridge towards the main home, I want to talk a little bit about what the students are doing during this time, because July 1st, 2nd, 3rd of 1863 would have been about middle of the 13-week summer session. And you can see there in the center, there's a handwritten schedule of what classes students would be taking in the summer of 1863. Again, in Schmucker's handwriting, but we know exactly, and I'll see if I can decipher it, but we know what classes they should have been in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, July 1st, 2nd, 3rd. In 1863, but they're taking classes such as popular theology, church history, Hebrew grammar, exercises in elocution, speaking, and reading. But sometime before June 26th, probably around June 15th, classes are canceled. And part of this is because some of the students leave to go and join the emergency militia to try to stem the tide of the Confederate invasion. Four seminary students joined the 26th Emergency Militia as Confederates move closer and closer into Pennsylvania. Governor Andrew Curtin puts the call out for emergency militia to help put down the invasion. And 57 college students and 4 seminarians joined Company A of the 26th Emergency Militia, and they're commanded by a seminary student. Frederick Kleinfelter, who's there on the left, is the commander of Company A. They leave Gettysburg to much fanfare. They take a train up to Harrisburg, where they receive uniforms and guns. They don't have a lot of time to spend drilling or learning to become soldiers before they're put back on trains and sent back to Gettysburg as Confederate forces begin to move into over South Mountain and towards Gettysburg on their way to the Susquehanna River. Well, as on June 26th, these soldiers are going to arrive back in Gettysburg again to much fanfare. Their arrival in town had been delayed by a day because the train in which they are riding hits a cow and derails somewhere around the town of New Oxford, just east of Gettysburg, and that maybe should have been a sign for them. But these soldiers get off at the train station in Gettysburg. They march through town, and they march out to Marsh Creek, just west of the seminary, just west of town, and they set up camp and they are waiting. And before long, the advanced cavalry unit in advance of Jubal Early's Confederate division is bearing down on them. And these men take one look at the cavalry, the experienced cavalry that's coming for them, and they turn and they run. The bulk of the 26th Emergency Militia escapes north overland, and they make their way back to Harrisburg. But some of these soldiers, some of the men even of Company A, the company recruited from Gettysburg, are captured by White's Comanches, the cavalry unit that is in advance of it's really good, John B. Gordon's brigade of Jubal Early's division. Well, on the morning of June 20th, the Confederates spend the night in Gettysburg, the night of June 26th into June 27th. This is the first Confederate forces that are in Gettysburg. War has finally come to Gettysburg. And on the next morning, the morning of the 27th, as the Confederates get ready to pull out and head towards York, Jubal Early, who is the crusty commander of the Confederate division, assembles the captured militiamen in the town square and paroles them. He doesn't want to take them with him. And he later writes in his memoirs with a tinge of derision, "It was well that the regiment took to its heels so quickly, or some of its members might have been hurt and all would have been captured." And he says something also to the effect that it would be better if they were home with their mothers rather than out playing at war. Well, the Confederates move off to the west, to the east, towards the Susquehanna River, and the town of Gettysburg breathes a sigh of relief. They think that they have experienced their experience with war, and don't know that in the next 5 days they will be visited once again. The seminary board is going to meet in the summer, in August of 1863, and they're going to pass a specific resolution that commends the students from the seminary and college for rose to the aid of their country. So if you look back in the seminary minutes from that time, there's a resolution on that. We do know that not all of the seminary students and all of the college students went to join the 26th. There were students like Michael Culver, who's actually a college student, who on the morning of July 1st talks about leaving Pennsylvania Hall on the campus of what's now Gettysburg College, and traveling up to the seminary and even climbing up to the cupola of the Lutheran Seminary to watch the battle unfold. And he recalled later on, quote, "We saw not far distant from us pickets of both armies exchanging bullets, and heard a shell from the first rebel battery pass in close proximity to our ears. This was all we desired just then to see and hear. The half dozen of us in the cupola left our lofty perch rather unceremoniously, passed rapidly out of the building and down the walk." So they had their little brush with battle and made their way to safety. Before we move on the right of this slide, you'll see a monument to the 26th Emergency Militia. This is located just down the hill from the seminary, where Springs Avenue and Buford Avenue fork, right in front of what's now Federal Point Inn, what had been Meade School. So you can go and carefully visit this monument today. Inside of the seminary, as the battle is erupting, is a family of 7 who are the caretakers of the seminary building and are caught quite directly in the fighting that is occurring on the morning of July 1st. Moving on to July 1st. Now here we have an image of Lydia Ziegler, who is 12 years old during the Battle of Gettysburg, and she lives in the building with her 4 siblings. Her father, Emanuel Ziegler, is the steward of the seminary, the handyman, and Mary, her mother, is the matron. And Lydia Ziegler is excited at first to see something of a battle. She says that she quietly slipped from the house to the edge of the woods back of the seminary and was enjoying the awe-inspiring scene, seeing this battle, when a bullet flew so near my head that I heard the whizzing sound. That and a call from an signal officer in the cupola sent me speeding towards the house. The Ziegler family are going to take refuge in the basement of the seminary building on the morning of July 1st, after Lydia goes out to the field. And as there's a lull in the fighting about midday on July 1st, the Zieglers are going to pack up whatever belongings they can carry and set off for a family member south of the battlefield. They're actually going to stay with Emanuel's, I believe it's Emanuel's aunt, who lives somewhere around the Round Tops. And it's going to be a couple of days before they come back. And even they tried to come back, and there's so much unexploded ordnance in the roadway that they have to turn back around and try again another day. And we'll talk a little bit about the Ziegler family experience after the battle a little bit later on. I'd mentioned that that there was another professor living there at the seminary in the summer of 1863, a man named Charles Krauth, and he had been a professor at the seminary for about 13 years. He lives in the house at the north end of campus again, which is still located there. And in fact, if you look at the Krauth house, originally the Schmucker house and the Krauth house were built to be identical to each other, and the Krauth house has been less altered than the Schmucker house. The portion there, the lower portion that you see on the right there, is an addition from about late 1860s, early 1870s. But the main portion of the house, the 4 windows, 4 above 4 windows there That would have been the original portion of the Krauth house. Well, the Krauth family stays on Seminary Ridge as the battle erupts right outside their back door. They do take refuge in their basement, and as the fighting goes on and gets more and more, it gets closer to the Krauth house. Charles Krauth decides that it's time to leave, and they come up from the cellar and they're going out the back door, and a soldier is shot dead right at their feet. And Krauth looks around, and he realizes that it's actually going to be safer to head to the west, to head towards the Confederate, because now the lines have shifted, and it's going to be more dangerous to try to go to the east to seek refuge like the Theziegler family had, because the fighting is going to move is moving into town now. So they actually take refuge on the Hankey farm, not far from along Mummasburg Road, not too far from the Peace Light. If you go north on Mummasburg Road, you'll pass the Hankey farm, and that's where Charles Krauth and his family are going to spend the days of the battle. Well, they come back to their home. Their home is being used as a hospital, just like the main building, just like the Schmucker house. And Krauth, as he comes into the house, he notices that part of his china set is in the yard. And he goes in the house and he opens the oven, and more pieces of the china set are in the oven, not broken, but just scattered all over. What he is really sad to see is that the family's silver tea service has gone, has been taken. And this was an heirloom. This was a gift. The silver tea service was a gift from Mrs. Krauth, Harriet Krauth's parents, on their wedding anniversary. And Charles Krauth and his wife, like you could imagine, must be devastated that their silver tea service, this family heirloom, is gone. Well, a few weeks later, in fact, Charles Krauth is reading the Gettysburg compiler, and he sees an ad, really, and if you look today, and I got this out of the digitized newspaper, it's very well tucked away, but it says, "An owner wanted. A silver-plated tea urn and pitcher taken by Colonel McIntosh of Buford's cavalry from a rebel prisoner and supposed to have been stolen from some citizen of Adams, Cumberland, Franklin, or York counties, have been left in my hands to be reclaimed by the owner, who can have the same by proving property and paying the costs of advertising. J.R. Welsh, Waynesboro, Pennsylvania." And if you're familiar with South Central Pennsylvania, Waynesboro is about 20 or 30 miles south west of Gettysburg. Well, Charles Krauth, as you might imagine, is probably elated to see this, and is able to recover his silver tea service from the mayor of Waynesboro. And you can see here the tea service and the china set are today on display on the 4th floor of Seminary Ridge Museum, not far from where Schmucker's Bible is. So shows how maybe the Confederates were not fully respecting Lee's orders to not harm any civilian or take any civilian property, but also shows that some of the way that war was affecting common people's lives. So moving back towards the main building of the seminary, the building is designated as a field hospital on sometime on the morning of July 1st, 1863, probably as the 1st Division of the 1st Corps of the Union Army are making their way towards McPherson Ridge to stem the tide of Heath's division that's making their way towards Gettysburg. Dr. George New, who is the medical officer of the 1st Division of the 1st Corps, comes back to the main building of the seminary and designates it as a field hospital. And throughout the day on July 1st, this building is going to be taking more and more Union wounded soldiers from the first day's fighting. And in fact, you look at some of the accounts of some of these men trying to make it into the building to safety. A man named, 2 soldiers, Bryce Blair and Levi Graham of the 149th of the seminary building, inside, and as they look around them, they can see bullet holes being knocked into the wooden steps, and they have to go down the steps and go around to the other side of the building to get in. But into the seminary building. Well, from July 1st, 1863 until September 16th, this building is going to be housing wounded soldiers. The last patient, Lieutenant Colonel George McFarland, is not going to leave the seminary until September 16th, 1863. The Ziegler family, we'll return a little bit for a few minutes to them. They're going to return to their home and find that it has been turned into a hospital, and are going to have to set to work helping care for wounded soldiers. 10-year-old Hugh Ziegler talks about having to carry amputated arms and legs that have surgeries that have been done. He carries them in buckets to the rear of the seminary and piles them up until they can be taken away and buried. Lydia Ziegler, 12 years old, talks about writing letters to families from wounded soldiers, writing letters for soldiers that she knows are not going to survive. So this is what they grow up really, really quickly. Mary Ziegler is making food and helping feed wounded soldiers. So that's what's going on for this family, and students are even taking part. Or being impacted by the students who didn't flee, who come back to the building, like Martin Luther Culler, who says that he returns to the seminary after the battle and finds that his trunk has been broken into his room, and a surgeon is, quote, freely using everything as well as my bed. Well, Schmucker also is going to return to the seminary, and he is going to try his hardest to make sure that his building is vacated in time for the fall session to begin. And almost immediately when he returns, he is trying to move the hospital process along and get his building back. He gets together a group of dignitaries that are going to go to Washington, D.C. and prevail upon the supreme medical authorities. But luckily enough, they don't have to go that far, and the building is vacated, like I said, on September 16th, and classes begin on time 8 days later. And it says a lot, I think, about the way that Schmucker and the seminary viewed their place in the battle. The battle was a distraction and an inconvenience to the seminary's main mission of training students for the Lutheran faith. So he wanted to get them out as soon as possible and be able to return to this main mission. Francis Hoover enters the seminary in 1863 as a seminarian, and he writes home, quote, "The seminary is still in a state of confusion. The soldiers only left it about 2.5 weeks ago. A great part of the furniture is lost, and some say that we will be obliged to furnish our own rooms. The seminary is very beautiful and stands on a very beautiful place, but the fences around it are all torn down, the trees are skinned, the branches and tops are shot away, and the sod in the yard is cut up." So even Hoover is seeing this. It's a very peaceful place, but it's also been a place of war. He's seeing that dichotomy that we've been talking about throughout this. Of course, here is probably the most famous image of this building, taken sometime around June 15th by Matthew Brady. Shows the seminary building with some of the windows shot out, and if you see a blown up picture, you can actually see underneath the trees right to the right of the building, you can see operating tables and some medical officers standing there. The seminary is greatly damaged. Many of the windows have been shot out. There's a 2-story crack in the wall. The northwest corner gable has been totally destroyed. And the seminary and the college issue a joint statement and a joint appeal to try to raise money to make the repairs to both the seminary and the college. And they jointly raise about $4,200. Here is the article that they put, and you can see On the right side, signed by Samuel S.S. Schmucker, Professor of Christian Theology and Chairman of the Faculty, C.P. Krauth, Professor of Sacred Philosophy, Exegesis, etc. So, and other people like Henry Bauer, who's the president of Pennsylvania College, Michael Jacobs, who's the professor who writes the first history of the Battle of Gettysburg, trying to raise money, and they don't ask for any money from the government. They just try to raise it, and they're successful. Schmucker is going to remain president until 1864. He is going to oversee the repairs to the building, and by the summer of 1864, the seminary has been repaired, and all signs of the battle on the building itself have been erased. Again, showing how the seminary sort of wanted to move away from the battle to return to its rightful place, training people for the ministry. And one of the big questions that we get is, where is there building damage? Where's all the building damage? And the answer is not there. It was all repaired within a year of the battle. And I like to end by talking about this structure on the east side, the west side of the seminary building. This is the doorway that Bryce Blair and Levi Graham would have been trying to get into, probably the doorway through which most of the soldiers would have been trying to get as they move from the horrors of the battlefield into the relative safety of the seminary building. And in 1914, the seminary makes the decision to erect the first monument to peace on the Gettysburg battlefield. And this structure is known today as the Peace Portico. And it is the first monument, predates the Eternal Light Peace Memorial by 24 years. And I think also speaks to the way that the seminary has viewed its role in the battle. That when they did decide to commemorate their place in the battle, they tried to commemorate the peace. And it's a juxtaposition between the horrors that side of the building saw, but then also that the main message of the seminary is to prepare men and women to go forth and spread the gospel of peace. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And look, I see some comments coming in, and I'm going to try to see if I can answer them, if I can get my PowerPoint off. So let's see. Does the Bible contain any marginalia, margin notes from Schmuckers? Oftentimes, we can tell a lot about a person based on their marks in the Bible. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. The Bible is in rather poor shape, and I did want to open it up and display it open, and I was told that I couldn't. So I have not opened the Bible, and I don't want to, just because it's very fragile. So that would be very interesting. What is he highlighting? What is he saying? What notes is he making? And again, yeah, what does that say? What is he focusing on? What is he stressing? So it's a great question from Pastor Schul. Thank you all. It doesn't look like there's many other questions, but we see some great people: Lutherville, Maryland, Wisconsin, Bethlehem. Bethlehem's a great place. Louisville, Kentucky, New Jersey, my home state. Spent a lot of time there. And again, I hope that you come. This is again a tour that we give on a regular basis at Seminary Ridge Museum. And if you want to come and see these sites and walk this ground and listen to these stories, it tells about the human side of the battle and how it affected these people's lives. Think about Lydia and Hugh Ziegler, 10 and 12 years old respectively. They don't write about their experiences in the battle till after 1900. In fact, Hugh doesn't write his experiences until 1933, and he writes them very vividly. And it really is just a indicator of how much this event was a focal point of his life. And really gets at the heart of how these people's lives were forever impacted. So I thank you again for spending some time with me today. We'll be back next Tuesday with Dr. Darrell Black looking at Confederate manufacturing. I'll be back again in 2 weeks to talk about Margaret Crichton's Colors of Courage. We'll be talking more about civilians. So if you like the civilian aspect and the civilian story, you definitely want to be tuning in for that. We will share all of these events as they come up on our Facebook page, and you can visit our website, www.seminaryridgemuseum.org, and go to the events page and see how these events are, see what events are coming up. And if you like what you see, I ask you share it with your friends, like it, comment. And if you really like it, you can always become a member of Seminary Ridge Museum. You get some really great perks, free admission to the museum, and it helps us continue this important work. So we hope to see you back here soon. We hope to see you back on the Ridge soon when it's safe to reopen. And thank you again for joining me.